Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be playing Algomancy, which is a game that I've been developing for a while. It's going to be launched on Kickstarter at the end of May or maybe very early June of this year. It's going to be launched in paper, but we're just using Tabletop Simulator to playtest because that's the best that we have. So I'm just using this video as my best attempt to showcase like the general play patterns and like what a turn of Algomancy looks like and things like that. So if you want to learn more about the game, there's a link to this page in the description. And you can see, kind of the aesthetics I'm going for. The most important thing here is the rules document. So, if you want to read ahead and like get up to date on like what the rules will look like, this is it. And I'm almost finished with it. There's just a couple more things I need to add, and then obviously hire someone to make it actually look good. But if you want to read that, you can. Otherwise, you could just watch the turns and see how the game looks. The one thing I will mention, there's like a couple months left in the development, so I'm finished finalizing the names and art on some of the cards, but the designs themselves, we've been playtesting for almost a year now. So the designs are good, but some of the names are a little weird, and some of the art will be updated to match the aesthetic that I'm kind of showcasing here. So enjoy the games, and let me know what other formats or what other information you'd like to hear about the game. See you then. So we start the game with 6 cards in hand and 10 cards in the pack. And the way that you draft in Algomancy is that the cards in hand and cards in the pack are interchangeable. So for the sake of that, I'm just going to put my hand into the pack. And that's how you would start drafting. You can imagine in paper, you're holding this pack in your hand, and you're just going through the cards. You're going to draft until there are 10 cards remaining in the pack. So we started with 6, so you're going to basically take how many cards you started with in your hand. But in case you forget how many cards were in your hand, as long as there's 10 cards left in the pack, then you're good to go. So the first card is Rampant Growth. It's a 4 cost, so the number at the top left is how much the card costs. And it requires 3 green threshold, or 3 wood threshold, which are those 3 little dots. It's a flower spell, and it doesn't have any speed indicators, which means it can only be played during the main phase. It has Graft, it's limited Graft, and it says allies gain +1/+1 in piercing until regroup. Piercing is similar to like Trample and Magic, except it's kind of a general attribute. So like damage can have piercing, spells can have piercing, and it also works on defense, which is a bit interesting. So you can block with a piercing unit, and it kind of like shoots an arrow through them. So that's Rampant Growth. And don't worry, I won't go through them all in this much detail, but Chrysalid Portal is a 2 cost. That's an earth symbol. The thing in the top right is battle. So that means you can play this during combat. It also has Graft, and it says delete target unit with less health than target ally. Soul Tithe, I had to do it. This is obviously temporary art, but negate target effect unless its controller pays 1. Effect just means anything on the stack, so this is kind of like negate or counter target spell or ability. And then if this effect is negated this way, draw a card. So pretty good. It's also quite useful at like stifling your own effects. Basically, like if you have a trigger that you don't want to happen, you can Soul Tithe it, and then you draw a card to get it back. So it's actually a pretty good card, but not for the reason you might think. Fireball Guy, temporary name, is a 2 cost, 3/2. When I enter formation, create a Fireball X, where X is the number of adjacent units. So at the most, this will be 3. Unless you're blocking, it can be 4. So it's just a guy who wants to attack with a bunch of other tokens. Spirit of Vengeance, really good card. Whenever a unit dies, I deal 1 damage to each opponent. And you got to remember the region limitations in Algomancy. So this is just whenever a unit in its region dies, and it'll do 1 damage to each opponent in the region that it's in. Spirit of Battle, a little templating issue, but it's a 1 cost, 1/1 flying, essentially haste. So you can play it before combat, and then whenever I deal combat damage to an opponent, sacrifice me. If you do, look at that player's hand and choose a card from it that player discards. This is kind of like the Thoughtseize of Algomancy, because you play it before combat, and the main phase happens after combat. So you remove cards from their hand before they have the chance to play them during their main. So it's actually a really powerful effect. It has Augment too, so if you can like sneak it on like a token, you can do some damage. Pacify, 3 cost battle spell, negate all of enemy effects targeting allied effects, players, or units. So there's a cycle of these cards in Algomancy, basically like board clears, like stop or stack clears, I guess, stopping things from happening, and they're all very powerful and important to have. This card just is like nothing targeting your stuff resolves, which is good. Phantasmal Prawn, so it has flying again, and whenever I deal combat damage to an opponent, you may sacrifice a unit. If you do, draw a card. And remember, this effect is graftable, so you can either take this effect and graft it onto other stuff, or, add stuff to the when you deal combat damage to an opponent trigger. I love the Mentor, so cute. Whenever you create a token, target ally gains +3/+3 until regroup. The main utility here is it's a graft enabler for 1 mana. So like you play this and you graft like Crystalline Portal onto it, and now you're killing stuff whenever you create tokens. It's a very strong effect. Burgeoning Mimic. At the end of combat, I deal damage to each opponent equal to my health. So the base rate is 3, but this has Augment. So if you put it on a huge thing, suddenly you're hitting your opponents for a sizable amount of damage. Awoken Tomb. This one's temporary art too. Haste. Whenever I am dealt damage, that 1x symbol means basically it triggers once per turn. Whenever I dealt damage, create an XX Earth unit where X is the amount of damage I was dealt. So this card's very good on defense. You play it, you block, you get like a 4/4. If you block like a 10/10, you just create a 10/10. It's really a good catch-up card, and it has haste, so you can like haste it in. It's actually an interesting phenomenon in Algomancy specifically, where there's like defensive haste cards, and it works because you can, bring them into combat with you. Soul Swallower, sacrifice another unit. I gain +2/+2 until regroup. Nothing special there. It's a good card. Immolate. So the square brackets mean basically you must resolve what's inside the square brackets before you can do the spell. So in this case, it acts like an additional cost. But this templating also works for things like Kicker. So I could put like a 2 mana symbol in there, and then it's like, if you pay the additional 2 mana, add some effect to it. There's also some things where you choose like the modes of a spell, and that's in brackets. So is basically as you're casting the spell, you resolve what's in the brackets. In this case, you sacrifice a unit to cast the spell. In some cases, it's like choose this or this. And then basically you have to decide that as you're casting the spell. So it's a very good catch-all templating that in the future will allow me to do a lot of cool things. But in this case, and in the base game, it's just, additional cost basically. Arc Charger. So this card is really sweet. It's a virus, which means you can augment it onto your opponent's stuff or anything really during combat. So it's kind of like a counter spell, but when it enters play, you make 2 fireball 1s. And then when it leaves play, delete all allied spells. So it has a drawback. If you play it on your side, you're making 2 fireballs and you have like a lot of value for 2 mana, but then it's just in play. So if you like try to target something with the fireballs, they kill your Arc Charger, it'll counter your fireballs. Or like later on in the game, it'll counter like your bigger spells, or it can really be a liability during a biggest stack interaction because it basically acts like Pacify. But it's a virus. So you can put this on your opponent's unit and then kill it and counter all of their spells. So it's a very, very flexible card that's like good early. It's good for counter magic late game. It's just a sweet card. I love it. Lil Mush. Another card that kind of fits that theme. When I enter play and make a poison 9, which is just huge, I think that's going to be toned down to 7 probably. Mostly because you can hit it with 1 dice, maybe 6. So you can just use 1d6 just for like quality of life stuff. And then when I leave play, each opponent puts a unit from their discard into play. So it's kind of like you get value on ETB, but then when it leaves, they like get the unit back. But you can kind of get around this if you like sacrifice it during the main phase. Again, you're in your own region, so they don't get the thing. So there's a lot of interesting play there. Boop. It's a virus. I gain +2/+2, so it's just like the equivalent in Magic would be like a flash enchantment that just gives it something bigger. So you can play this basically as a 2/3 unit for 1, and then when it dies, augment it onto something. Or because it's a virus, you can put it on your own stuff in combat as like a combat trick. So really good pack. I'm seeing a lot of red cards here, so I'm probably just going to take those. But the beauty of Algomancy is the opening pack. There's so many different directions you can go. So after drafting, I pass the pack to my opponent. They do the same. And after that step is the mana step. So I gave my opponent the initiative, so they have to choose their resources first. And they start with these 2 exchangeable resources to begin with, just to make the first turn smoother. So they don't actually have to trade any cards in hand for them. And the same for me. So I'm going to get double red resources here. And they're just going to get a single earth. During the mana step, I also, because Spirit of Battle has haste, I also could play it this turn and basically like Thoughtseize them. I decided that's not really what I want to do. So I'm going to move through combat and just go to the main phase. They play Lost Guardian, which I know that the Red Earth really loves this card. At the end of their main phase, create a growth X, where X is their health. Growth is a spell that just says target unit gets +X+X. So It's basically like +2/+2. So it's a sweet card and you can graft to it. Then they end their main phase because they're done. I play my Arc Charger. When it enters play, create 2 Fireball 1s. And Fireball is just a spell that says deal X damage to any target. Fireball 1 basically denotes that the Fireball will do 1 damage to any target. And that's the end of the turn. So that's 1 turn cycle of Algomancy. At the beginning of the turn, we untap, and then we draw 2 cards, and we pass packs back and forth to each other. So I get the pack that they were just recently drafting from. And I'm not going to go through this pack as in-depth as the other one I did, but basically, you know, you can exchange your pack in the hand as you want freely. For this case, I kind of have a game plan already, so you can pause and read these cards if you want to. I have a game plan already, which is kind of the mono red, like my hand's good, but if I wanted to, there's nothing stopping me from switching, you know, going full earth, going full green, so I could take my whole hand, put it into the pack, and swap these cards out. So, you know, if you think you're getting cut, or if you think your strategy doesn't line up well against your opponent's strategy, I could switch into Earth, and then know that, you know, the next couple packs I'll see more Earth cards, because I'm not going to be able to play my whole hand out this turn anyway. So that's kind of what I'm deciding here, but for the sake of demonstrating in this video, I really kind of just wanted to showcase like an aggressive red strategy, just get like the basic flow of the game down. And then from there I can decide. So the way this works also, you leave 10 cards in the pack. So you can see I have 12 cards in there. And now, because it's the second turn, if I want any additional resources, I'm going to have to remove cards in my hand from the game to take those resources, or essentially recycle them. You put them on the bottom of the deck. So I'm taking cards that I want to play. And then there's also like 2 green cards most likely that I'm taking. Just to remove, or maybe I want to move into green as well. So I finished drafting my pack, and I get rid of the Earth card because I know I'm passing my pack to my opponent, and they're in Earth. So I'm kind of like limiting their options in that sense. And I take a fire resource, which says if you have 3 fire, take a shard for free. So it's like a benefit for going monocolor, is you get kind of free resources. The shard, it's a resource that adds mana, but it doesn't add to any threshold. So it's kind of like a colorless land, like in Magic or things like that. Then it is my opponent's turn, so they pitch for resources because I have the initiative now. So I make decisions first, then they make decisions. And they're going to take a green, and they're also going to take the swap resource. I need a better name for it right now, but it lets you stay open. So they currently have the ability to trade 2 resources for 2 of any other resource during their next turn. So we finish the mana step, we move right to combat, and I'm coming in and attacking. We have these like visual barriers to show like regions. So this is how you enter an opponent's region. So now I've attacked them, I'm in their region. We can interact with these spells or whatever we want. There's a priority window here, and I declined to act because if I fireballed their guy, then they would respond with a growth. Then we resolve the combat in my region, or the attacking region entirely. So I do combat damage to them, I fireball them. Then we resolve combat of them attacking me. Then they're going to growth their guy and do 2 damage to me. That was a pretty straightforward combat, which is kind of why I wanted to highlight, you know, me playing like an aggressive deck. The combat should be really clean, and this video should be quick, I would think. Then we move right to the main phase, and I play 2 2-drops because I have 4 mana. So I'm going to play Fireball Guy and Phantasmal Prawn for my turn. Then it's my opponent's main phase, and they spend 4 mana to play... Ooh, okay. Oh boy, okay. So they play Accelerated Germination, which makes 3 1/1 units. And then the guy they played before, whenever an ally enters play, you put a +1 counter on it. So 3 allies enter play because these are flower tokens. So you put 3 counters on the Flourishing Flora. The flower token art will be updated. That's just a placeholder for now, but it'll look kind of like that, at least, like the same color scheme. And that's another turn cycle. So the turn cycle of Algomancy, once you get the hang of it, is very quick, because basically we are just only interacting during combat, and everything else is just like us playing our stuff. So when you get the hang of it, like, you know, there's a lot of things to do online, but it's like setup, combat, and then build for next combat, right? We're starting the next turn again, we're going right into the next draft. And it's just all Algomancy is centered around the combat step, because that's how you interact, that's how you kill your opponents, and all of that. So we're back to another draft, we draw 2, we get a new pack, The way drafting works with 2 players is you see 3 packs and then you get new packs. So we've been passing them. This is the last time that anyone is going to see these packs. So there's no point in hate drafting at this point. We're just going to get rid of these and then get new packs the next turn. So it keeps things fresh, but you still have some of that back and forth of like knowing what you passed your opponent, because I saw this pack to begin with. So I know, cards they didn't take, and I know cards that they took, or they could have taken it and put it on the bottom. They could have them in hand and then put them back into the pack the next turn. So there's a lot of mind games in the drafting process here of like what to do. And what I do is I see that that Phantasm that does 1 damage whenever a unit dies, there's a lot of tokens on the battlefield, right? They created 3 tokens. I'm going to have a lot of units, and I have the Soul Swallower, which lets me sacrifice units to make it bigger. So I'm just all in on this burn plan right now of like make a bunch of tokens and kill them. And I'm deciding not to go into green and just stay mono red, because the math works out here. If you see there's 12 cards in the pack, I can take the Immolate, and then all I have to do is take 1 more card and pitch it for resources, and I could just have all of the red cards in the pack. So it lets me stay up on cards, because if I wanted to go into green, I would have to pitch 2 cards for 2 resources. But right now I only have to pitch 1 card for 1 resource. So it's nice to stay monocolored if you can. So then we finish the draft again. My opponent has the initiative, so they do their mana step first. They're going to exchange first 1 resource for a wood, then a 2nd resource for a wood, which gives them a shard. So you could do some really clever tricks where you can basically set it up that you don't actually have to take a resource in future turns by conserving your exchangeable resources. And nobody's forcing you to take mana, right? You can stop taking resources whenever you want. So they don't have to trade cards for mana this turn if they don't want to. But they are going to. So they're going to trade 1 more card for another exchangeable resource. So they're staying open, basically. They only need the green and wood, and they're just delaying their decision until later. So they could move into red now with that exchangeable resource if they want to. I'm going to do the same. So I'm pitching this green guy just to take another fire and another shard. And I have a haste card, so I'm playing it now during the mana step, because that's when you do it, is you get mana, and then you play your haste cards all in the same step. So I'm playing this guy, he's flying haste, and when he does damage, I get to take a card from them. So it's a very aggressive play, because it has flying, so it's evasive. So I can bring like my Arc Charger into combat or something like that. So this is a good showcase of like when you would play haste stuff. And then my opponent has initiative. They declined to attack, so they're just not attacking with anything. And then I'm coming in with formation. And the way formation works is units vertically adjacent share attributes. So all the units I'm attacking with have flying, because Phantasmal Prawn has flying, and the other guy, the haste guy that I played, also has flying. And my opponent, and I get a fireball. The fireball is on the stack from Fireball Guy, which says when it attacks, do something. My opponent is responding to that trigger by playing Algomancy to kill my flying guy. So the stack works very similar to how it does in other games, where an ability will go on the stack and the opponent can respond to it. So we're using this fireball to denote I will get a fireball, but they're killing my guy before I get the fireball. And now it's my turn to decide how I want to interact in this stack. So I can Flame Shield, which will counter it and give me a fireball. I can just let it happen. I could Immolate and sacrifice my guy to draw a card. And I'm just going for a Flame Shield because I would like to keep my ability to discard them. So it's going to counter everything on the stack. And then I'll get 1 fireball, keep my guy alive. It's a really good card if your opponent's threatening you with a lot of spell tokens. Like, if I'm attacking them with like 10 fireballs, you can Flame Shield them all away. But they're going to play Hush Mush, which says negate target effect, and then that effect's controller gains control of it. So they're countering Flame Shield and giving me Hush Mush. And that just happens. So Flame Shield gets countered and goes to my discard. They kill my flying guy with Seismomancy. But I'm going to sacrifice him to Immolate, which that one has the square brackets we talked about, which means as an additional cost, you sacrifice the unit, and then I draw a card. And then state-based actions pushes this guy forward because the front row always has to be filled. So now there's 2 units next to the Fireball guy. So I'm going to get a Fireball 2. Obviously, Fireball guy is a temporary name. But I will get a Fireball 2, which I can use in combat if I want to. And then my opponent goes to blocks because I do not attack them. So they block with the growing thing. They actually should not be able to attack here, so that's something we missed. Because they have initiative, there's no counterattack in this spot. So I think we catch that later on, but maybe not. Because I'm still like teaching new players. So we resolve this combat first, but they would not be able to attack here because they have initiative. They passed the chance to attack. So once you pass your chance to attack, there's not like infinite counterattacks. So they take 15, and that's the end of combat. Then we move to the main phase. And I'm going to sacrifice my Hush Mush to draw a card as well before that happens, from the Phantasmal Prawns trigger. So main phase, my opponent has initiative, so they go first. They will get a growth 2 at the end of combat as well from their Lost Guardian. So they don't do anything. I'm tapped out. I used all my mana in combat, so I have no ability to play stuff. And then we move right to the next turn again. This new draft step, we get a whole pack. The shortcut you can do is just dealing 12 cards to each player, because we're going to draw 2 for turn. And then we get a new pack of 10 cards, so we're effectively adding 12 cards to our hand and or pack. And then it's right back to drafting again. So this time, I don't really know what I want. So I just combine my hand in the pack, and I'm like, okay, which cards would I like to keep? I see a lot of tokens, and this card, All-Consuming Blaze, the one on the right of my hand right now, does 1 damage to any target equal to your red affinity. So because I'm on a red, that card's insane, and my game plan now is just burning my opponent out. So I just want to do as much damage as possible and then finish the game with the burn spell, plus the dealing 1 damage to them for every token that, or every unit that dies as well. So I've finished my draft, and I'm going to give the pack back to my opponent. I'm taking this Fertile Soil from them because they're in green, and this card makes a 1/1 token for every green threshold or affinity you have. And that's insane. So I show them that I'm taking that card away from them too. So I get my mana, so I get a fire, and I get another shard. Because I have initiative now, so I have to make decisions first. And then my opponent does their mana because I've passed the step. They're moving into red, so they're playing a lot of colors here. So effectively, if you think about it, they're showing me the really good red card they're taking away from me too. If you think about it, they're effectively down 2 cards relative to me. So right now I think they have like 3 cards in hand and I have 5. Because they're going so many colors. Because I've traded in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards to have the mana that I have. And they've traded in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think. So you can play more than one, faction in this game, but there is a cost to it. So I have initiative, so I attack first, attacking with my flying guy and the fireball guy. And I get a fireball 1 trigger. And again, my objective, I just want to hit them for damage. I'm going to take a lot of damage from them here. They did play a haste fire unit, by the way, which is going to put a counter on their Flourishing Fauna because they added a unit to their board. Even though I'm only hitting them for like 4 damage, 5 damage here, it's going to be enough, I think, next turn, because I'm saving my mana for the main phase. And that's one really important aspect of Algomancy, is like you saw last turn, I spent all of my mana during combat, and I had nothing to build up for the next turn with. And that's just something you have to plan out. So you're like, do I interact? Do I save mana for the main phase? And normally, like, you want a balance of the two. Which is hard to do, but like in my hand right now, I have interaction and units. My opponent's attacking me for a whole bunch of damage. And they don't know this, but I basically have nothing in my hand that I really want to do, because I would like to hit their face with my All-Consuming Blaze for 6 next turn. They're going to play Growth on their Recurrent Spirit, so I'm going to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 4 is like 11 damage. So that's the end of combat. We move to regroup. All the units go back to where they are. And then it's the main phase. I have initiative, so I go first. And I'm just going to deploy some units. So I play this guy who has the broken attribute. That name's going to change, but basically the attribute says whenever someone with the broken attribute deals damage, they do that much damage to the target's controller. So it's kind of like double damage, but it also, like, if a broken unit deals damage to a unit, it'll do that much damage to their controller as well. So it's really, really strong, which is why it is a 4-cost 2/4 with no other abilities. My opponent is going to play Mega Death, which is kind of a meme card. That name might stay, I'm not sure. Whenever he attacks, create a poison 5. And then they're going to play All-Consuming Blight, which says create a poison 1 for each unit you control, which is that's a lot of poison. And this is where that card like Flame Shield that says like count negate all effects. There's quite a few of those in the game to handle situations like this. Because poisons and fireballs, all the spell tokens have the burst attribute. You have to play them all at the same time. And this was one of the best fixes, I think, in the game, because it stops like infinite stack interaction where, you know, someone plays like one poison and then one poison. So it basically makes the poisons behave like a big spell, even though they're all individual. So like you can't counterspell all of them at once unless you have something like Flame Shield. But because my opponent has to play all those poisons at once, they're limited to basically like one level of interaction. And then that's the end of the turn. So we move back to the draft. And hopefully at this point you're seeing like this cycle of the game. I just wanted like a short preview of what the turn cycle looks like. So I know I'm keeping these red cards, so I'm just putting those two back in the pack. And I think I can take one more card here, because I probably want to take another fire so that my all-consuming blaze does more damage. So from this, I'm just going to take Molten Rebirth, just as like a failsafe for the following turn. It just says create 3 spawns. And spawns are just, there's 0 ones that can't block, and they die at the end of combat. So they're basically the most useless possible unit, but you do get 3 of them. And I have the guide that says, whenever a unit dies, I deal 1 damage to target opponent. So, you know, having them in play is good for that. I also have the guy who can sacrifice them to get bigger. I also have the guy who can sacrifice them to draw cards. So I'm kind of fully in on the token strategy, so I might as well just take that. My opponent has initiative, so they get to make mana and do things like that first. And they decline to get any mana. I'm going to get more fire because, as we know, I'm trying to do damage to them. And my opponent's at 14, and I have all-consuming blaze for 6, plus sacrificial burst for 4. So I know they're pretty dead unless they have like a big counterspell here. And they're coming at me with everything, except I think they're leaving back 2 tokens. So it's pretty fortunate that I had this burn here, because they're bringing all of these poisons. So this will be a good showcase of how spell tokens work, essentially. They have to choose which region they want to bring them in. So they've brought them in here. Then they can cast them. Because they have initiative, they have to act first before I have a chance to counterattack. So they're going to play all of these poisons on my units. And they're individual spells. So, you know, they interacted with separately, they resolve separately. But when you play them, you basically are forced to maintain priority and cast them all in a row. So we're showing basically, because Megadeth has this trigger that says when he attacks Mega Poison, they're going to respond to that trigger. So they're going to do this stuff before they get the Poison 5, because otherwise they would need to play the Poison 5 at the same time as all of these others. So it's a really like smart play of just keeping your options open for later. And then they're declaring all the poisons and, you know, their targets. So this is basically, this ruling keeps spell tokens in check, because they're forced to do all this at once, and then I can interact largely. Whereas if I started interacting and they were like, poison you, poison you, poison you, this interaction would take forever. But now it's a very clear, like, they do something, I do something, the game ends. So I'm really happy about that, because it allows you to feel like you're going big. Like, 7 poison is a lot. But it's manageable. I mean, they're going to die here, so... So I'm going to Sacrificial Burst. That's going to do 4 damage to them, plus 1 damage from the Spirit of Vengeance from the unit that dies. So that's going to put them down to 9. Yep, he goes to the discard. They take 9. Sacrificial Burst. They're going to let Resolve. Then I'm going to go for All-Consuming Blaze, which does another 6, puts them down to 3. And then I have 3 units in play, and a guy that says, whenever a unit dies, deal 1 damage to target opponent. So at this point, we realize that they are dead, and the game is over. So hopefully this helps highlight just like how a game of Algomancy functions. I didn't want to show too much interaction in the first video, which is why we kind of agreed I was just going to go burn ahead of time, so that we could just showcase like, this is the turn cycle, this is how a game goes. So I'm going to try and let me know if you want to see more videos. I'm going to try and get more like interactive ones in the future. But hopefully this gives you the feel of the flow, which is, you know, we're both taking our turn essentially at the same time, but the initiative essentially dictates who needs to act first. So it keeps the game very fair, because we're always on the same amount of mana, the same amount of cards, at all steps of the process. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.